This week, a federal judge rejected the Justice Department's attempts to keep secret a memo from former Attorney General Bill Barr.
The memo, specifically about the decision not to charge former President Trump with obstruction of justice of the Mueller investigation, was, the judge says, misleading. CNN senior legal affairs correspondent Paula Reed joins us now with the latest. So Paula, reading this, there's a little bit of legalese in this. Tell us exactly what it alleges Barr did here and why it's significant.
So this is significant because it's so rare for a federal judge to accuse a former attorney general and the Justice Department of misleading the court, and she comes pretty close to accusing them of a cover-up. Now, this whole issue arose in a lawsuit by a government transparency group that says it doesn't fully trust the official story that came out of the Barr Justice Department during the Mueller investigation, and they want certain documents, including this memo that was actually finalized on the same day that the former attorney general briefed Congress on the Mueller investigation. The Justice Department has said that this memo is protected. They say it's legal reasoning that helped the attorney general with his decision. It should not be made public. But this judge, Judge Amy Berman Jackson, she knows the Mueller investigation and related cases quite well. She oversaw the case of Trump ally Roger Stone and one of the cases of former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort. She says that the decision not to pursue charges against former President Trump in the Mueller investigation was a foregone conclusion. She said Barr had already made that decision before he received this memo. She said this memo was strategic and therefore it should be made public. Now, she also said that she believed that this obfuscation was part of a pattern by Barr and the Justice Department to mislead the public and Congress. Pretty extraordinary words from a federal judge.
Yeah.
No question. Very direct. Paula Reed, thanks so much. Joining now to discuss, former federal prosecutor and CNN legal analyst Jennifer Rogers. Jennifer, you've been involved in a lot of cases, including with Justice Department. As you read this and you look at the evidence here, do you see the former attorney general as having put his thumb on the legal scale, as it were, with this?
Oh, absolutely, Jim. I mean, frankly, that isn't new news for any of us who've been following the Mueller investigation and report. He did that way back when he made his misleading summary of the Mueller report a couple of years ago. But this is just another instance of the Justice Department under Bill Barr hiding things from the public because they understood at some level that what they were doing was not consistent with the law and the facts.
The words that Paula described so well as just stunning from a federal judge include her writing, the agency, meaning the Department of Justice's redactions and incomplete explanations obfuscate the true purpose of the memorandum. What might the public see in this letter? Can you explain why it matters now after the fact?
Well, what they're doing now is they're litigating over the release of the memo. So this memo was created at the time. It was, what the judge is saying is it was effectively a strategy document, not a legal document. And that means that it doesn't fall under the portions of the Freedom of Information Act that allow government to exclude it. So at the Justice Department at the time, they had decided that they were not going to charge President Trump, and then they had to come up with the best way to relay that so that the public would accept it and that it wouldn't cause a big furor, which of course it did anyway. And now, all these years after the fact, the judge is saying, well, this wasn't part of the decision-making process. This was just this strategy that you were trying to kind of put things in the best light for the public. So that's why it has to go over. I think it's important for the historical record. I mean, a lot of people know what happened here, but there's still a lot who don't. So when we get the memo, I think people will understand more.
Well, the parallel you make to the way Barr misleadingly described the Mueller report as it came out, right? Ascribing definitiveness there from Mueller's findings that weren't frankly there, and that stuck to some degree for many Americans. I want to ask you this: beyond for the historical record, are there any potential legal consequences for Bill Barr? I mean, he was a lawyer, disbarment, anything like that, or is this just about reputation?
Well, it depends. I mean, certainly the bars of, I believe Bill Barr is barred in Washington, D.C. They could start a grievance committee procedure to disbar him if they decide to do that, if they get a complaint. I suspect, though, that nothing will happen. He was fairly careful in his testimony. Even the judge talks about him being disingenuous instead of saying making false statements. So the notion of trying to prove that there were actual lies here, I think, would be a tough one.
Joining me right now on this is CNN legal analyst Carrie Cordero. Carrie, I'm really been curious as to what you think of this. Tell me.
Well, Kate, I think this memo being ordered, released by the judge, it demonstrates the severe lack of confidence that she developed not only in Attorney General Barr, but in the Justice Department. And that's really the longer term consequence from Attorney General Barr's leadership of the department is the language that you just read in her opinion and more of it that's throughout the opinion demonstrates that in this FOIA case, which is the context of this litigation, a Freedom of Information Act litigation, normally a judge would give the government a lot of deference regarding not releasing internal legal deliberations. And in this case, the judge is saying, no, I don't believe the Justice Department. I don't believe the arguments that the Justice Department made for me. And so therefore, I'm going to order release of this memo.
And I think what you're hitting on is kind of the bigger import of all of this. I mean, you've got a federal judge saying that the last Justice Department and the former Attorney General, they aren't credible and essentially lied. I mean, even in this crazy world that we often find ourselves living in, this seems like a really big deal, Carrie.
Yeah, I mean, look, as a former Justice Department lawyer, your credibility is basically the most important quality that a lawyer in the Justice Department has. And so the fact that this wasn't the judge's memo is not just directed at Attorney General Barr as an individual. What she was saying was that he was disingenuous, but also the Department of Justice was disingenuous to her. And that has consequences for every judge, every attorney, Justice Department attorney that walks into not only her courtroom, but other courtrooms all around the country.
What can we all learn from this memo at this point?
Well, so the memo itself is the context of what she's saying now. It has to be released. And what it's going to reveal is information that was provided to Attorney General Barr regarding what his strategy was, what his thinking was in making the decision not to prosecute former President Trump for obstruction. And remember, all of this came out of the special counsel Mueller's investigation into whether the president obstructed the investigation into interference in the 2016 election. And so at the time, the Attorney General had decided not to prosecute the president. And what the judge is saying is that the memo that went up to him really was a political document, a strategy document, and that he had already made up his mind. And when the government made arguments to her, they were not accurate, and they really, she's accusing them basically of lying to her regarding how he used that memo to make his decision.